the University of Johannesburg. The future reimagined.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this third part of our podcast series about how technology is transitioning our daily lives in South Africa and on the African continent. Today, I've got the special honor of welcoming our guest, Izak Potgieter, who is an architect by training, but has transitioned into virtual reality. And we're going to explore that a bit and see what he's busy doing. My name is Herman Meyerberg from the Institute for Intelligent Systems, where I head the Metaverse Research Unit, and it's truly an honor to have you with us today. So Izak, you say architecture wasn't enough for you, so you are transitioning into virtual architecture.
I very quickly realized that it's a lot more fun to design in the digital world than the real world, and a lot less admin.
Okay, that's excellent. And you've got an undo button, which always makes life.
You can just Control Z the contractor's work in the virtual reality.
So tell us a bit about yourself. Where do you come from? What are you currently busy with in terms of your studies and your life?
Yeah, firstly, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
It's our honor.
Well, where do we start? We start at the start, don't we? I grew up in Imlahleni in Mpumalanga. I did my undergrad in architecture in Pretoria. I was very keen on doing architecture since as far back as I can remember. That ended swiftly when I started working in an office and realized that it's quite a hectic industry. So I went to do my postgrad here at UJ. It was a great experience. I really enjoyed it, and it really geared me towards this career. So very quickly, I did one project in honors. My lecturers looked at me. They said, "You need to work in virtuality and video games. This is clearly your interest." And I said, "What? I have no background in this." And they said, "No, this is where you need to head." So they really pushed me in the direction, and I'm very grateful they pushed me in that direction. I spent both my honors and my masters working with architecture, digital architecture, and in architecture and video games. Built some video games. And that kind of just snowballed into this. So I'm currently doing my Ph.D. in Metaverse Studies, and I'm looking at virtual reality and how virtual reality can be used to represent cultural heritage and contested histories.
Okay, so contested histories. Tell me a bit more about that. I know we've got a rich history in contested histories, so tell us a bit about
I think every country has a rich history in contested histories. You know, when it comes to history, I think we tend to decide what it means and then move on. So time goes on. Once enough time has passed between an event and the present, we kind of give it a label. We say this is what something used to be, and then we go beyond. But we rarely have the ability to access history from a first-person perspective. It's somehow hard for us to realize that history actually happened to real people who laughed and cooked and had their own complex behaviors and so on. We kind of see the past as having happened to robots. I don't know. This is the experience I've had when talking to people about this. So when working with virtual reality, I always ask myself, how does this not just be a gimmick? Because when new technology comes up, it's very easy to kind of just play with the novelty of it because it's there. It's something that's still new to us. But with this, the real value I see is the fact that you're able to access a history, access a time, access a place through the perspective of someone that actually would have been there. You know, it's not one-to-one, obviously. Nothing can ever replace the real lived experience, but it gives that opportunity. So I've been looking at having interviews with actual ex-residents who went through this experience, who used to live in Sophiatown, and just tell their stories. Come in from a fresh perspective, not think about what's been written about it, what's been said about it. We kind of have this golden age, Miriam Makeba view of what it was, and it was also that, but it was also these small stories that average people who used to live there have to tell and that they've cherished all their lives. I mean, I showed this work to one man. He was 7 years old when Sophiatown got demolished in the 1950s. And he looked at me and he said, "Take me to the cinema now. I want to go to the cinema." And I took him to the cinema in virtual reality, and he said, "That used to be a double neon sign, not a single neon sign. The movie posters were on the left, not the right of the door." He was 7 when he had that experience. It's incredible, how how deep these memories go.
Yes, yes. So you're recreating Sophiatown. Any specific area of Sophiatown, or is it just a overall look at Sophiatown?
Yes, so it's recreating what Sophiatown looked like in virtual reality. And maybe I should start by just saying why. So I've been working with the Trevor Huddleston Center, which is the museum in Sophiatown, and they've kind of been the stewards of Sophiatown's history. And what happens now is they take you on a tour. It's a great tour. I would recommend it to anyone. But the guy takes you for a walkabout and he says, this used to be here. That used to be here. Here where this lady's Yorkies are barking at you, that used to be the biggest cinema in Africa. Here where this fence is falling over, that used to be, I don't know, the biggest club in Sophiatown. Okay, you have that experience. So where I saw this, fulfilling a role is where people can go on this VR experience first, actually see what used to be there. I mean, even for me doing research, I didn't realize just how much was going on there. It really hits differently when you actually can physically see what was lost. Just the sheer magnitude of it. It was a whole city. And going through that and then going on that tour, that's where I could see it providing a lot of value. What was your question? I just wanted to give some background on that first.
Yeah. So you're recreating Sophiatown. Is it specific to any era
Oh, yes.
of time, or
It is. It's specific to an era and an area. So it's looking at around the time of the demolition in the 1950s, early 1960s. And the reason for that is mostly because, if I'm doing interviews, people are still alive that experienced that moment in time. Less so people who maybe experienced it in the 1920s, but that was also the kind of golden era of Sophiatown, at least in our collective imaginations. In terms of the area chosen, it's an area along Good Street specifically, which is where the biggest cinema, the Odeon Cinema, used to be. It was kind of the high street of Sophiatown in many ways. And it's also chosen because that's the area that I could get the most data on. It was the area that was spoken about the most. And yeah, it seemed to hold a very special place in that neighborhood back in the day.
yes. And in terms of going out and speaking with people, do they offer this information freely? Is it somewhat of a sensitive subject? How do you experience your discussions with people?
So I'm still in the process of doing the interviews. But one thing that surprised me is, maybe not even surprised me, but older people love to tell about their youth. That's just true in general for everyone. I mean, my grandmother would sit with me for hours and talk about her stories. So actually, no, people are really open to talking about it. I went to the District 6 Museum recently in Cape Town, and it was a wonderful experience. And there, because District 6 happened a bit more recently, they still had a lady who used to live there that gave the tour. Yes, and she couldn't stop talking. The moment she realized there were South Africans in the museum, because it's usually French, German, Dutch, and then when she heard that I was from South Africa, she was so surprised, which is quite sad actually, that it was a surprise for that a South African is actually trying to engage with this history.
Yeah.
And she, it was great. She just kept on telling me all these stories, and you can see it's cathartic in many ways.
And I think that's an important point that you're bringing up. We as South Africans often forget our own histories, and we tend to shy away from discussing it, from opening up this can of worms about Sophiatown and District 6, which is, it's sad. It truly is. We need to be discussing these matters and getting our healing through open communication. So yeah, I think your work is quite interesting. Why did you choose Sophiatown specifically?
So the way we settled on Sophiatown, the original idea wasn't to work with Sophiatown. So after I did my master's, we got a short 6-month grant from the university to do a project about urbanism in Johannesburg in virtual reality. Okay, that's quite a broad topic. So originally there were ideas to rebuild the CBD which would have been quite a task. I don't know who came up with that idea. To work with Melville copies and to kind of it was essentially to show people what Joburg looks like who aren't from Joburg. Okay. And this kept shifting and this kept moving until we realized that maybe there's not that much value in that. Maybe there's not that much of a need for it. And it eventually settled on working with the past, because that's something that VR can provide. That's not so easily provided by other mediums. And that settled on Sophiatown. Now, the reason for Sophiatown is, in my own personal research, I'm obviously interested in architecture and in cultural heritage. You know, my three big interests have always been architectural, history, and technology, computers, virtuality, those kinds of things. So it's really amazing that I get to work with all three in my job.
You said that you did a lot of interviews. Tell me a bit about those interviews. How did that shape you choosing Sophiatown?
Yeah, so when I looked at these kinds of projects, cultural heritage projects done in virtuality across the globe, most of them are in Europe, a few in America, and in sprinklings here and there in Asia and so on. They all do one of two things for the most part. They either recreate what the site, the physical site, looks like today. Might be some Roman ruins that you scan and you put it in VR, you can have a look around, as if you're a real tourist going there. And then the other kind of thing that's done is they try to reconstruct it in virtuality. Okay, you take your Roman ruins and then you do some 3D modeling magic and you make it look a little bit like it would have looked like when it was new. But for me, it's still missing something very key when we engage with cultural heritage, and that's, of course, the intangible side, the actual human perspective. You know, it's one thing to visit a Roman temple and see, okay, that the columns used to be red, that's what that used to look like, cool. It's another thing to go and maybe witness an actual ceremony taking place, or a ritual or a festival. So for me, what I wanted to do from the start of this is take that a step further, the whole way of representing cultural heritage in virtual reality, because if we can get the first-person perspective, we can get those human stories in there, if we can show real events that happen in the space. So it's not just physically buildings and streets that you say, okay, I get it, this is what it used to look like. You're actually having an experience, you're getting a window into the culture of this place. I think that's really a crucial part that's missing today. And with Sophiatown, the fact that it didn't happen that long ago, I can still have interviews with people that had these experiences. That was instrumental in choosing Sophiatown, the fact that I have access to that knowledge. It's not lost yet.
Yes,
and
yes.
I can try and work out a methodology for bringing that in.
Yeah, you can capture that whilst it's still alive.
Yeah,
as such.
I also just think, you know, Sophiatown is a very typical example of something that happened in every single place in South Africa, really. And, you know, you were just saying earlier, when we talk about our history in South Africa, I think we kind of stopped at Nelson Mandela, but there's still so much more that we're not aware of, or actively aware of, or that's hard for us to access. I mean, a version of this, the demolition of Sophiatown, it happened in District 6 in Cape Town, Cato Manor in Durban. Even in my small town where I'm from, the township the area got demolished back in the 1950s to create separation. This was a violent act that was committed pretty much everywhere, and it still defines the way our cities look like. And I just don't think that's something that we engage with enough. You know, I think for me, there was one paragraph about Sophiatown in grade 4, and that was the extent of us talking about it.
Yes, yes.
Or any of these kinds of places, even though it's literally just a few kilometers away where these histories happened.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if I think of Sophiatown, I think of Miriam Makeba and the jazz music that came from that. But that's all I know about the history of it. And I think using virtual reality as a medium of conveying the story, it truly is a powerful way of doing it. And then the viewer becomes part of this history. They become a vital core player in experiencing it.
It just hits differently. Reading in a textbook that so many people were evicted in the 1950s, okay, you go on with your day, but being in there and listening to these real stories and seeing, oh, this happened to real people and these are the very human ways it affected them, it just hits very differently. And I think we need to engage with our history on that kind of level,
Yes.
a much less superficial level.
No, definitely. So in terms of the process, you mentioned a bit about doing 3D scans, but that's not really available to you right now. You can't go out and do a 3D scan of Sophiatown.
Yes, it's all gone. I mean, 2 homes survived. One which is part of the Trevor Huddleston Center, one which is in absolute ruins. And I think a single wall, the guy even showed me this wall used to be an original wall. It's just a short wall. It's all gone, which is insane because just the sheer amount of stuff that used to go on there. So no, I can't go in and scan it like I would a Roman ruin or however it would be. So traditionally, people would either go and scan these sites, whether they're in ruins or whether they're still, in a good state, or they would work off of photographs. Now, this is also a problem because Sophiatown and all these places that were demolished during the Group Areas Act, they weren't seen as having any value by the apartheid regime. I mean, of course they weren't. That's why they were demolished. So they weren't photographically documented very well, except for maybe some few freelance photographers here and there. Jürgen Scharberg especially, who did a lot of great work. So you can't recreate the place just from that. So for me, the core thing that I'm interested in is, can we recreate this history from oral sources? And I mean, what excites me about this is, I mentioned where most of these projects are, they're in Europe, because there you can still visit the ruin of the temple, there you can still go to Versailles, whatever it may be. But in the global south, most of our cultural sites, or a lot of cultural sites, have been erased during colonialism, whether it's in Africa, South America, wherever it may be. So you can't go and visit these spaces as easily, or if you do, they're in a very degraded state, for the most part. And also, a lot of our history was recorded orally. That there was a different way of recording history in the global south, in Africa, than there was for the West. So how can we give legitimacy to these sources? And how do we turn a story from an old lady into a building? That's quite a process.
So how do you do that?
Oh, how do you do that? I just try to be very descriptive. I try to ask for spatial descriptions as much as possible. And people tend to be very attached to different spaces in their lives. I mean, even if you think of, your childhood home, you can remember that quite clearly. We kind of mediate experience through space, or at least as an architect or trained in architecture, that's what I believe, and that's what I found. So you try to access that, and you try to get as much information out of that as possible, so that if someone says, okay, you rebuilt the street, why does it look that way? You can say, yeah, because this lady told me it looks that way. And that should be enough of a source, because she was there. It was her experience.
Have you ever come across any conflict? An old lady saying it was like this, and a other guy saying, no, it wasn't like this, it was like this. And what do you do in such a situation?
And that's kind of interesting to me as well, because memory is strange. Memory is fluid. I might have a memory of, falling down my blue bicycle when I was 5. But if I go back in a time machine, it might have been a green bicycle when I was 6. Does that really matter? There's still a core of truth there. And I think, the way people are describing space, they're still trying to describe something that was very real, even if maybe some small details get lost or get muddled up.
Yeah, and I think it's a very important fact that you're bringing up. We tend to forget things, and that's why when you go to court and you have to describe a crime scene or a accident, each person has a different perspective on that same series of events. And I think that's the power of what you're doing is taking all these stories and concatenating it and bringing it into one event. It might not be 100% accurate, but you're telling a story, and that's the important thing.
Exactly, and there's a truth to that. And there's also this fact that trauma does also impact memory. This was, of course, a very traumatic event. So someone might tell a story and they might be smiling and thinking of, their grandma used to cook this meal every Sunday in this kitchen, and she went to the shop to get this thing. Another guy might have a very different experience. This was where some traumatic event happened to him on the street. And that changes, that impacts the memory, the way that they talk about the space. It paints it differently. Both of these perspectives are true. Both of these perspectives are valid. And that's another thing that I really see being valuable about this method of representing cultural history, virtuality. You're able to present multiple perspectives at once. And you're able to access multiple perspectives at the same time. And all these perspectives are equally valid, because they're subjective.
Yeah. And in terms of the viewer, what can people expect when as soon as you're done with your Sophiatown? Is it going to be a narrative story that you're going to tell them, or will they be free to explore it and see Sophiatown for themselves?
So I found that there's a bit of a sweet spot there. If it's too guided, people kind of go for it and say, okay, well, cool, that's what that was. If it's too open-ended, people tend to get a bit overwhelmed and confused. And in the middle, they'll just say, okay, I think I'm done now. I don't know where to go next. So I want it to be open-ended in that maybe you have a set of 3 options at a time. And then you take one option and you go through this narrative journey, and then it stops, and then you have different options. And it's showing you the same space, the space of Sophiatown, specifically on Good Street, but through different perspectives as you access different narratives. And that'll be guided in some sense, where you start with stories that are about, people moving in or people's original memories, and you end with stories about the eviction. So it will be somewhat open-ended, but not too open-ended, because I find that eventually people just kind of don't know where to go next and just lose interest.
Yeah. And if it's too open-ended, then the programming side of things becomes...
oh my goodness, I don't want to say that, but yeah, it's very difficult.
It needs to be an honest answer, because the programming that goes into creating such an experience, not just the programming, you need the 3D models of your houses, your cinemas, every sign, every piece of paper that needs to be recreated somehow, and the best way of doing it is either through doing scans of objects that survived, and you mentioned that there isn't a lot of objects, and then on the other hand you can recreate it in 3D software, like Blender.
Oh, it's really a marriage of very many different skills. I think about XR virtuality as being like drawing. If an engineer uses drawing, it does a very different purpose to when an artist draws, to when an architect draws. It's just a tool. If a architect is going to work in VR, or an anthropologist or an engineer, they're going to produce very different outcomes, very different applications. It's not so much a field as it is a tool. No one studies drawing, but it's something that so many different disciplines use. So for me, there's still so many different combinations of things in virtuality. I mean, now I'm working with architecture, cultural heritage, and this technology, and it's producing a certain thing. But even within virtuality, it's 3D modeling, it's texturing, it's animation, it's coding. It's really so many different skills that need to come together to put this thing together.
Yes.
And that's been really, I almost want to use the word fun. It's been really fun to learn all of that and to see it come together. I mean, it's been very difficult, but it's really rewarding to see something come out of that.
Yeah. So what would be your advice for someone wanting to enter into virtual reality? What do they need to do? What software do you use?
Every piece of software that I use is actually open source.
Oh, wow.
I don't use anything that costs me money, and I don't use any software that I've downloaded illegally. There's been a real shift in the last 5 years, where before it was really dominated by Adobe for Photoshop, Autodesk for Revit, all of these things. I mean, they're still dominant, but some very heavy hitters have come out recently which are completely free to use, and in my opinion, do a better job than those softwares. So I use software like Blender, which is completely free to use. It's not a big piece of software even, it doesn't need internet. And then I use something like the Unreal Engine, and then there are some other auxiliary pieces of software I use to kind of work with planning and so on.
Yes.
If you want to start with this, buy yourself an internet, make sure you have a decent internet connection, and just go into YouTube. I taught myself this just basically from YouTube tutorials, honestly. And
that's true. I mean, you're an architect working in virtual reality. You taught yourself using YouTube tutorials. I'm a geneticist that also used YouTube to start creating these things, and it's difficult. It is challenging, but it's so worthwhile seeing your thoughts coming to life on a computer screen, and then entering into virtual reality and truly experiencing what it is that you've created.
And in South Africa, there's still a bit of a wow factor. It's maybe not as common as it is in some countries to see this technology. Most people haven't experienced this technology yet. I mean, I only experienced this for the first time last year, honestly, which is really not that long ago considering what I do. And there's so much work out there. There's so many where people are so open to this new technology. If you can be one of the firsts to kind of have those skills, you can very easily build a career out of it.
Yes.
And in South Africa, there's a lot more opportunity here. There's a lot more going on than I think most people realize.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we are leaders in the world on the field of virtual reality and augmented reality in the creation of these experiences. One of the best-selling virtual reality games was developed in Cape Town. So we're seeing a lot of people from South Africa really competing with your San Francisco-based Silicon Valley companies and doing great for themselves.
And South Africans don't realize this. I think we always have a bit of an inferiority complex. We think Europe, America, Japan, whatever, they're 20 years ahead of us, maybe one day. This is not true. We actually have some real advantages in South Africa in this field. And, I can think of the example that you told me earlier about you going to the States and looking at their programs and seeing, okay, it's actually not that much better than what we're able to produce. I met with a woman from Germany yesterday who works in 4IR, and she was saying, yeah, like what I'm seeing here, you've got so much to teach us, actually.
Yes.
And we just need to get over the fact that we actually can compete globally. We actually have a lot to offer the world. It's not the world that we're constantly needing to learn from. We actually have so much to teach.
Yes.
And
Africans has this. We've got this hard-working ethic, and we can make things work with the minimum amount of money.
This is our big advantage.
Like you said, all the resources is available as open source software, or at least free software. And anyone can start doing this.
This is our biggest our advantage, I think. And it's why South African talent is so sought after in the developed world. We know how to do a lot with not that much resources. You were telling me about the story in the States of this app in VR that the university wanted to build. And the professors came up with the idea. They presented it. Okay, everyone's happy. They paid however millions of dollars to a private company to build it. It was built. They presented it, wrote a paper about it. Here, I need to come up with the idea. I need to build it. I need to learn how to build it. I need to present it. From start to finish, you are involved in some stage because you're working with limited resources.
Yes.
And that is a recipe for making experts because you're involved on every single stage. And through that, you're able to optimize things, you're able to learn, you're able to see where things can improve. It's not so specialized. You become a real generalist in the field.
Yes. And that positions you well to compete with anyone in the world.
Exactly.
Now, this project is done, it's a transdisciplinary project that you're doing. It's between the Department of Architecture and then the Department of Multimedia.
Yes, it is. The Ph.D. is in multimedia because it's, quite a new topic. I think there isn't a dedicated faculty, so multimedia seem to make the most sense. But like I said, it's a very interdisciplinary project because of the nature of the tool.
Yes.
I'm working with a guy from anthropology who's helping me with the interviews. I'm working with people from architecture as well who are helping with the sourcing of the material, all these different kinds of things. And it really is, like I said, it's like drawing. You can't say department of drawing. It's just a tool. So it works between many different faculties and many different topics.
Yeah, and that's how we're progressing science because we're marrying different sciences that would never have been combined in normal daily lives. I mean, I've seen work originating from botany and mining that's not related to rehabilitation. We're seeing a lot of new innovative disciplines evolving from this new technology.
And even before the term 4IR was coined, I think this is where work was heading anyway. We're moving towards having to be generalists more than specialists. In my dad's day, you could work for a company, you could retire at that company. I don't think that's really the nature of work anymore. You need to be really adaptable. You need to become a generalist. You need to be able to offer many different skills in many different fields. That's kind of where things have been heading anyway.
Yes,
and
yes.
I think the whole 4IR revolution has just supercharged that,
Yeah.
or will.
And what goes with that is you need to constantly upskill yourself to be able to use these new technologies.
Absolutely,
So-
absolutely.
So that.
You know, to give you an example, I started with this project in March of 2021. Okay. I had to learn myself. I haven't worked in VR before that, honestly. I had to teach. I worked in video games and video game architecture. So VR is a natural step from that, but I haven't worked in VR. I had to teach myself how to implement, let's say, lighting. Lighting is implemented very differently in VR than a traditional computer game. By the time the project was finished 6 months later, the techniques I taught myself to implement lighting was obsolete. It was done automatically. You know, we talk about technology moving fast. It's a very fast moving stream, but to actually be inside of that stream, you realize, oh my goodness, this really is very fast.
Yeah.
You know, now, where are we in 2022, end of 2022? There's so many more things that are no longer needed that I had to teach myself. That's now obsolete. That's the pace of this. It's absolutely insane.
It's mind-boggling, and how big tech companies like your Microsoft, Unity, Unreal are developing this novel technology and making it easier for people like us who aren't computer specialists to enter into this field. They're making it easier, but also you need to be constantly on top of what is happening, what's the newest things happening, and how do I implement this into my experiences. So in terms of your research, you're being guided by multimedia. That's Anthony Ambana is your supervisor there, and Denver Hendricks from architecture. And yeah, I can think they should be very proud of what it is that you're doing.
Oof, let's
So-
see. Let's see when it's done.
So let's say it's done. When do you plan on having the experience done and dusted, and what's the plan going forward?
I hope I can. The number one goal of this actually is for it to be deployed as part of the museum's exhibition.
Okay.
If that's not the case, I don't really know what I'm doing it for. Okay, for a
So-
PhD, but still.
Yeah. So you want to give back to society. You want.
I saw a real need, and you know, you're doing a PhD anyway. Might as well do something that can contribute, that can be used in the real world. I
Yes.
think it's a wasted opportunity when it kind of just becomes a cognitive exercise. So that's the number one goal, but I'm hoping it can go beyond that, but we'll see. When it should be done, so I have a prototype that I've been displaying, and it was quite amazing. I had it shown at the Sophiatown Remembrance Day, and you know, that was really important for me, because if the reception wasn't well there, then clearly something was wrong, because you know, it's a very sensitive topic at the end of the day, and you know, people might not want to actually relive that. So the reaction was very positive, especially from ex-residents. So I've started to build up a relationship with them. The interviews are ongoing. I hope to have the experience completed by the end of 2023. That's my hope. But you never know how things might go. So it might happen in 2024. There's also things from the museum side. Things move slowly when you're an NGO. They might not have the funding for it in time, but we'll see how things fall in place.
Yes.
But I'm confident it will be deployed. They're very excited about it, and we've been having very productive chats with them.
Okay, and that's excellent. And any plans on showcasing it at international events?
Yes, you see, this is why I'm saying at minimum I want it to be exhibited at the museum, which it will. They're very keen for that. But I think it would be incredible if this thing is worthwhile to put it into international shows, to put it into international competitions for virtual reality, especially because it's an all South African team building this. I think that's really special. If we can produce something that can actually, you know, even if it's just nominated, even if it doesn't win or whatever, but that operates at that level, that gets awareness at that level, and it's a completely South African team that built it, which it is currently. You know, the team
Yes.
that I'm leading it, but the team that's working with me, they're all South Africans. I think that could be really special, and that could be really quite something.
Amazing. So speaking of sensitive subjects, and I guess you've been asked this quite a few times. You're a white Afrikaans guy recreating something that was demolished during apartheid. How's the reception been in terms of you going into Sophiatown, going to the Trevor Huddleston Memorial, and just overall, how have you experienced it?
Yeah, this isn't something that I'm not aware of. It's definitely something that I've thought about before and been asked before, and I think it's an important question to ask. I guess the first thing that I can say is that it's not just me. I'm leading this project, I'm building the actual experience, but I'm working with a team, and it's a diverse team of which I actually am the only, white person at the end of the day. So there's that, and it's important to recognize that. Then the other thing that I can say is, from the start, I've really tried to be aware of this kind of not falling into this kind of white guilt, white savior. I'm trying to, what do you call it? I'm trying to do this for the sins of my ancestors, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because then it really becomes about you. And, that's not productive. That's not doing anything for anyone except maybe your own conscience. So the way I've been trying to look at this from the start is that I'm taking information directly from ex-residents. It's not my impression of Sophiatown. It's not my idea of what it used to be, because it's not my story to tell. I'm trying to take stories, take real accounts from people who live there, and just be a mediator for that into virtual reality as much as I can. Of course, some bias will come in. Of course, the lady's going to tell me the bricks were red and my red bricks will look different to her red bricks, because, there's just some level of imprint that you make as a creative when you're making something. But trying to mitigate that as much as possible has kind of been there from the start of this project. And then I suppose it also opens up a bigger conversation. Why am I one of the first South Africans to know how to do this? Why am I one of the first South Africans that has these skills? Of course, I had certain opportunities. I was able to go to university. I was able to do my master's. I was able to teach myself how to do this on internet, on YouTube, whatever it may be. I've had, obviously someone has opened those doors for me. So from this as well, that's a bigger conversation, that I'm one of the first to be able to do this. But then also, I think it's a bit cynical to just sit with these skills and not do anything with it. Again, there's a very small time frame for doing a project like this, because the people that we are interviewing are in their 80s, in their 90s even. So you can't also just sit and wait for things to get better, which is why with this, I've also been teaching. I've also been engaged with learning students at the University of Johannesburg, the majority of which aren't white, on how to build these apps. And we've actually had a lot of success, and they've come up with some really cool ideas. So it's a starting point. We have a long way to go as South Africa, but I think we can't just not do anything about it. It's not ideal, I suppose, that it's starting with me, but that's where it's starting. And as long as it doesn't stop there, I think that could be a good thing.
Yeah. No, I think you are the biographer of Sophiatown. That's how I see it. You are collecting information and then writing a story. The fact that it happens to be in virtual reality, that makes it unique, but it's still ultimately a story that you are telling. And that gets me excited, and we need more people to be involved in this. And as you rightfully said, you're starting this and you're finding a productive workflow for how we can recreate these experiences, these lost cultural heritage. And that's going to be in the public domain for anyone to use.
Exactly. And with the museum, they work with a lot of school kids. They work in a lot of disadvantaged areas. This is something that can have a broader reach. So, to kind of make it about me doesn't do that impact that it could have justice. And just as an added thing at the end of the day, I am an Afrikaans guy. I'm one of the firstborn into the new South Africa. I'm from a staunch Afrikaans town.
You were born in?
I was born in Emalahleni, Witbank, in Mpumalanga.
which
I was
year?
born in 1996.
1996. Okay, yeah.
So in a sense, even if it's coming from the other side, there's a history there that also belongs to me in some sense that's been grappled with, by all South Africans.
Yes, yes. And you're busy writing the new history of South Africa, and I think that's amazing. It's a big job, but
I hope I'm busy mediating the history. But I hear what you're saying.
Yeah. No, it's excellent. Well, Izak, it's been fun having you on the show. Thank you so much for coming in. We really appreciate it. And it's exciting to see what you're doing on Sophiatown. I'm looking forward to experiencing Sophiatown for myself as well, and learning about our lost cultural heritage. It's truly something that we need to focus on more, and I like what you're doing, and especially since we're just past Heritage Day and celebrating Heritage Month. I think this is an excellent opportunity for people to start engaging with their heritage, with their past, and really opening up conversations on the topic. So thank you for coming in.
Thanks. It was an absolute pleasure. I can't believe how quickly that went.
Time flies when you're having fun. On that note, thank you so much for joining into this podcast. We really appreciate your support. If you've got any ideas for future topics, please do send them through to my email address. It's hermanm@uj.ac.za. It will be on the screen as well, but for those listening, I'll repeat, hermanm@uj.ac.za. And we're looking forward to continuing these conversations on how 4IR technologies is used in changing the African continent for the better. My name is Herman Meiber, and it was my pleasure having you today. Thanks.
The University of Johannesburg. The future reimagined.